And welcome back. Democratic presidential candidate Kamala Harris campaigns in Michigan on Sunday, while her Republican rival Donald Trump will stop in 3 eastern battleground states just 2 days before Tuesday's U.S. presidential election. Opinion polls show a historically close race, and the New York Times Siena College poll published on Sunday showed Vice President Kamala Harris and former President Donald Trump neck and neck in the 7 states that are likely to determine the outcome on Tuesday. And more than 64 million Americans have cast their vote ahead of Tuesday's polls. What impact, if any, will the U.S. election results have on South Africa? Political analyst Professor Dirk Kotze joins us to unpack this. Prof. Kotze, more than 600,000 jobs have been created in South Africa by U.S. businesses. 1.8 trillion US dollars is the value of trade between South Africa and the U.S. To date, by the way, year to date in August. And importantly, U.S. and South Africa relations have become very tense over the last 2 to 3 years. What impact, in either way that this election may swing, would it have on U.S.-South Africa relations?
Yes, it is a very decisive election, including for South Africa, but obviously, first of all, for the U.S. itself. I think it is both, they look at both domestically, internally, as well as internationally. And I think that's where we will fit in, is obviously more in terms of the international perspective. When it comes to Africa as a continent, I think it receives more attention lately from the U.S. because there's lots of international competition or attention focused on Africa, whether it is from Japan or India or Turkey or Russia or China or the European Union or the U.S. These are all some of the main players now on the African continent. And one of the big issues that they are focusing on is how to get access to the resources for renewable energy. And that includes the U.S. And I think that has changed the ballgame since the first administration of President Trump, for example. So where he was very dismissive of Africa and South Africa, but Africa in general, I think he will have to pay slightly more attention to it from a business point of view, not from a necessarily a political point of view. And previously, during his first term, it was the time of the pandemic. It was obviously very much of a complication for everyone, and that included also the relationship.
Can I just pause you there? How much of the business approach is Elon Musk whispering in Donald Trump's ear, specifically given that Tesla is one of the biggest EV companies in the world, and South Africa has the largest deposits of critical minerals that are needed in EV production? One sees the synergy there as you describe it, but how much of that is Elon Musk's influence on the campaign?
No, I don't think he's the particular person that has sort of almost an advantage or monopoly on it. I think it's a very wide spread or spectrum of business interest that's involved in that. He has obviously become very prominent now in his public endorsement of former President Trump. So he will definitely play a role, but I don't think we must now elevate him to the status as the person who's going to determine what will be his approach towards South Africa. I think there's simply too many other types of technologies which has nothing to do with cars or transport that will have to are also affected by this. And I think this is why the case of South Africa specifically, but Southern Africa in general, that's why I present it as something which is a game changer compared to what it has been in the past. And therefore, it's not about ideology, whether South Africa is close to Russia or China or to BRICS or to other places. It does, especially when the Democrats are in power. When President Trump becomes president or former President Trump, that might have a different perspective. He might have a different perspective on that. But it will be balanced with these business interests. And that is how politics and especially international politics work. Ideology is only one side of the story. The other side is the more pragmatic and practical and sometimes business interests.
Let's scenario Donald Trump victory for a moment. At least we have some data points to look at in terms of what his decision-making will be in geopolitical moments. One, when Donald Trump became the president of the U.S., one of the first things he did was to cut down U.S. aid and contribution towards its allies, particularly its NATO allies. That's the first he did. The second thing he did was to withdraw from the Paris Agreement, and he then said that America will no longer be the breadbasket of the world. He withdrew funding from crucial programs the world over that were seen as aid programs. South Africa relies on the US for a great deal of strategic aid, PEPFAR being an example of some strategic aid. Does a Donald Trump presidency mean that the relationship between South Africa and the US, particularly when you think about South Africa's criticism of NATO, South Africa's criticism of the US during the Donald Trump era, not doing enough in terms of global warming, and us being a country suffering from global warming, and lastly, on matters of PEPFAR. Do you imagine that relationship to change?
We don't know, to be honest with you. I don't think we must presume that the approach that he followed in his first administration laid the foundation for any approach later on now. Let's say he wins this election. The world has changed since then. It's not anymore, as I said, that crisis period of the COVID pandemic. African countries have become more prominent. As I've explained now a number of times, the interest that African countries can provide to a widespread of the big powers of the world have changed dramatically. The role that African countries are playing, including South Africa, on the international scene, that has changed. It's not the same as 10 years ago. So therefore, I think one should not already assume that he's going to sort of sever some of the links with the European Union, that he will withdraw to some extent from NATO, that he will have a much closer relationship with Russia. It's not a given that that will be the case. And I think what we've seen in this campaign of his is not so outspoken about these matters as he has been when he was elected for the first time. So I think he learned also in the first term that it is a much more complex type of situation that he has to manage than the more sort of ideological approach that he used in the beginning. So therefore, he still has some of his slogans, WAGA, and that America must be first and those type of things. But when it comes to relationships, I haven't heard, for example, that he is going to reduce the relationship this time again with the European Union.
Yeah. Prof Kotze, thank you so much for your time. Really do appreciate it. That's political analyst, Professor Dirk Kotze.